everyone. I'd like to thank Maggie and the whole team from the Sociology Department at USF for organizing this conference and giving me the opportunity to make this presentation. I'd like to thank the SSSI for sponsoring it, as well as all the other supporting organizations. As you probably know already, I had hip replacement surgery a week ago, and I'm doing really fine, but I'm not quite ready to be physically present at the conference. And that makes me sad because I had really looked forward to seeing old friends and meeting new ones. SSSI has been an important organization in my life, and I am honored that you asked me to show my film and to talk about the work that I've been doing in compassionate interviewing with Holocaust survivor Jerry Rawicki. I have long been interested in emotions, especially grief, loss, and trauma, and in qualitative methods, particularly autoethnography and collaborative, interactive, and compassionate interviewing. In 2009, I first got involved in working with Holocaust survivors when our university formed a partnership with the Florida Holocaust Museum. My students and I then began interviewing survivors in the Bay Area. We did around 45 interviews, some with survivors who had never told their story before, and some who had. I worked with the Florida Holocaust Museum to contact survivors, and then the USF Tampa Library videotaped and transcribed the interviews, and now they are audio synchronized with transcripts online, and they're available for anyone who would like to watch them. I used as a model the Shoah Foundation interviews, which were sponsored by Steven Spielberg. There are 52,000 interviews of survivors in that database. And by the way, altogether, we have about 100,000 interviews with survivors. These interviews were question and answer. They were one-shot interviews and chronological, so that we asked questions about their lives pre-Holocaust, during the Holocaust, and after the Holocaust, with an emphasis on the Holocaust. I was very glad to work with survivors in this way, and I found the work life-changing. I was aware, as all of you are, of the limited time we have to do face-to-face interviews with survivors who now are between 74 and 100 years old. So I tried to think of novel ways to do this. Is there anything that we're not getting that perhaps we could be getting? I wanted to allow for the stories to be told in a different way, perhaps in more detail and more depth, and maybe more emotionally. And I wanted to figure out ways to listen better and more deeply, which to me was part of the healing process for them. In thinking about the stories that survivors tell, here's some of the things that I considered. 1, stories are told differently in give-and-take conversation than they are in traditional interviews. In conversations, your story is affected by the questions someone asks, the experiences and stories they offer, and the responses that they give to your stories, which might then generate untold stories. Stories are told differently in developing relationships. I don't know about you, but for me, in spite of my love for personal storytelling, I don't usually probe deeply into my feelings and experiences with a stranger. Instead, I wait for trust to be built, we become friends, and then we share more important and personal stories as we become closer. So there's a mutual sharing, and there's an opportunity to work through one story and develop it and change it. And that's what I wanted to offer the survivors I talked to. So especially when asking about trauma and pain, I think being in relationship is extremely important. So you're not just coming into a life for a one-time interview and then leaving someone emotionally open and vulnerable and then walking away. So what I want to do is stay there when I can, as long as the person wants to talk to me. So this is my life, my relationship with him. It's part of my life. There is no field to leave. Another consideration I had was to focus on survivors' lives now, since so much had been done about their experiences during the Holocaust. I was interested in studying loss and grief, and to me, the Holocaust survivors are the experts. I wanted to learn from them, and I wanted to just be with them in friendship through joys and sorrows. I wanted to be someone they could talk to about how the Holocaust intersected with other life experiences. So there's some differences in my work from how we usually think about interviews or oral histories. My goal became not just gathering stories about Holocaust experiences, but trying to work with survivors in ways that might be a rewarding experience for them and even better their lives in some way. I wanted to work with them rather than doing research on them. After trying on many names for this process, I now call it compassionate interviewing and storytelling. In compassionate interviewing, researchers and participants listen deeply to, feel passionately for, share vulnerably with, and connect relationally and ethically to each other in an ethics of care. In compassionate storytelling, researchers, sometimes with participants, write and tell stories with empathy and respect. And there is a desire to relieve or prevent suffering if possible. Jerry and I share goals for this research: to write stories, give talks, and do work that has the possibility of bringing experiences to audiences that could make a positive difference. We seek to make changes. One story, one life at a time, and reach the larger community of Holocaust survivors and other interested folks. This approach adds a relational and emotional dimension to the research we do on trauma, such as the Holocaust, that enables us to learn from our interaction with survivors as well as from what our participants say. In this approach, survivors also participate in the analysis of their experience. They become story analyzers as well as storytellers. Now, as academics, we often think that we are the story analyzers. We tell you what it means. But I think that survivors have ideas about what stories mean, and I find when I include that, it makes my analysis more meaningful to more audiences as a result. My ongoing relationship with Jerry also provides an opportunity for us to try to understand together the perils and joys of being involved in a compassionate research process. While not many researchers have the time, inclination, and or the personality to immerse themselves in relationships with participants, or to study their own close research relationships, nor do most research projects call for that, I offer this kind of immersion as an option to consider, especially when studying sensitive issues such as loss and trauma. Finally, I have wanted to try new forms, to write short stories or show visually in documentaries, forms that might be more accessible to more people than 200 pages of unedited transcripts, and more visceral than snippets of story in some social science research. Jerry was the first person I asked to participate in this ongoing project. Immediately when I met him, I knew I wanted to continue working with him. He was enthusiastic about spending more time with me and exploring his experience. And as you will see, he is a wonderful storyteller. He's very passionate about sharing his story. He goes deep into his story. He's open to feeling his story as he tells it, which makes it emotionally rich. He loves to analyze and challenge his own story and my analysis. He doesn't just tell an already constructed story, but he explores his story with me and develops them between us. He's interested in knowing about my life as well, so that we have mutual exchange, though I try always to keep the focus on him. I'll give you just one example. When I first met him, I told him I had written this book, Final Negotiations, about the dying and death of my first partner, and he asked me to read it. So I gave it to him, and I didn't know whether he would read it or not, but the very next time I saw him, he had read it, and he said to me that reading the book made him feel closer to me and more open because he knew I had experienced grief and loss, and he felt I wanted to hear and could hear his story. He's continued to ask me about that story, by the way. And of course, this is what good friends do with each other. Jerry and I have worked together for 6 years. I've lost count of the number of times we've been together, sometimes recording, sometimes not, just eating lunch, sometimes just as friends hanging out together. We talk on the phone, we email constantly, and he is like part of my family. We have written 4 articles together, including a short story, and we have made this film that you will see today. There have been many high points of our work together. but going to Poland in the summer of 2013 together was probably the high point. I had been a year before, but he had not been back for almost 70 years. So his son's family ended up moving there for his son's work, and it was just a coincidence. And Jerry kiddingly said to me that he said he was going to go there, and he kiddingly said, "Why don't you come and go with me?" And I said, "Jerry, I can't go to Poland with you. I just went to Poland a year ago." But before I drove back over the bridge from St. Pete to Tampa, I just said to myself, there's no way I'm not going. I have to go. And I wanted to go to support him, but I also wanted to participate firsthand in his memories and feelings when he arrived back in Poland. So I went for a week, I've been in there for a week, and I hired sight unseen a videographer from one of the universities there. We also went to Treblinka together, where Jerry lost several of his relatives, and we went to his hometown. But we didn't film in those places. We only filmed in Warsaw, where he had lived in the Warsaw Ghetto. And he later had then stayed in Warsaw and passed as a Catholic. The result of this filming is Behind the Wall, and I think it will provide discussion for you with Jerry about his return to his homeland and his feelings and responses to Poland and the Polish people, as well as the working of memory. And perhaps I will get on Skype if we can make that work afterwards, and you also can ask both of us about how compassionate interviewing and storytelling work in practice. If for some reason I do not Skype in for the questions and answers, I hope you enjoy the film and enjoy talking with Jerry. And again, I am very sorry that I can't be there with you, but if anyone wants to email me about this work or get a recent paper that I've done on this work, I would be more than happy to send it to you. Enjoy the conference and enjoy the wonderful Florida weather.